right, so get this. Today we're diving into this idea of like a world without complaints.
Without complaint.
Yeah, world without complaints. I know, right? Sounds a little crazy at first. I mean, is that even, like, possible?
Not possible. I'm intrigued.
We're exploring this book by Will Bowen. It's called A Complaint-Free World.
Okay.
And he really dives deep into this whole concept. Now, full disclosure, our deep dive here is more based on like his personal stories and observations. Not so much hard scientific data.
Gotcha.
But his insights are definitely something to think about.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bold idea for sure. But I think what makes this so interesting is Bowen doesn't just see complaining as like, what a little annoyance, right?
Right.
He argues that it actually like shapes our reality. It limits our potential.
Oh, totally. Like that saying, what you focus on expands.
Exactly.
And speaking of focusing on something, Bowen has this amazing story about his determination to give Maya Angelou the 6 millionth complaint-free bracelet.
Wow. 6 millionth?
Yeah, so he had this vision of 10% of the world like embracing a complaint-free lifestyle.
Okay.
And he knew she had to be a part of it.
That's wild. Didn't he didn't even know her at that point, right?
Nope. He just put it out there, that intention.
Mm-hmm.
And then through this series of, unexpected events, he actually gets to meet her and give her the bracelet.
It really makes you think about the power of belief, huh?
Right. It's like he willed it into existence.
Yeah.
And her response when she got the bracelet was pretty powerful, too.
I bet.
She compared the impact of 1% of the world being complaint-free to Einstein's belief that we only use a small percentage of our brain power.
Wow.
And she even suggested that if just 1% of the world embraced this, like, war would be a thing of the past.
It's a pretty incredible thought.
It is.
Shifting our language, our mindset, and just like unlocking this whole new level of potential.
Right.
And creating a more peaceful world. But Bowen also acknowledges the challenge, like negativity, deeply ingrained in our culture,
Oh, absolutely.
He compares it to a cloud, like obscuring the light. It reminds me of this newspaper publisher he talked to. The publisher was like, crisis sells way better than good news.
It's so true. We are drawn to the negative. It's like we're addicted to complaining.
Yeah.
Even though, statistically speaking, we live in the safest, healthiest, most prosperous time in human history.
Right. It makes you wonder, why is that?
Yeah. Is it just human nature? Or is there something like deeper going on?
That's a great question. And it's something Bowen really dives into. He argues that we become so used to complaining that we don't even realize we're doing it. He uses this powerful analogy. Cigarette smoke.
Cigarette smoke.
Yeah, it's everywhere, right?
Yeah.
We often don't see our own part in it, and yet it impacts us way more than we realize.
So basically we're like polluting our mental atmosphere with negativity.
Pretty much, yeah.
And we don't even realize it. Wow, that's a sobering thought.
It is.
So how do we break free from this complaint cloud, so to speak?
Well, Bowen talks about this complaint loop, where complaining, it attracts more negativity, which leads to more complaining, and so on and so on. It becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Breaking free takes conscious effort, awareness. And to kind of illustrate this, he shares this pretty intense story about his dog, Ginger, getting hit by a car.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and understandably, he was furious at the driver, who was just completely dismissive.
It's hard to imagine not complaining in a situation like that. It's almost like an instinct, right, to want to just vent.
Exactly. And Bowen acknowledges that there are times when complaining is justified, especially when we're in pain or seeking resolution,
Right.
But even then, it's crucial to manage those complaints and not let them spiral into like unproductive anger.
Okay.
The takeaway being, even legitimate complaints, they need to be channeled effectively.
That makes sense. It's about finding that balance between expressing your feelings and not letting negativity consume you.
Exactly.
Now, this next part, this really surprised me.
Right.
Bowman actually talks about the benefits of complaining.
Benefits, okay.
He shares this anecdote about feeling self-conscious as a teenager. And he would complain about his weight as a way to avoid dancing with girls.
Interesting.
And he admits that in that moment, complaining actually benefited him.
It's a reminder that sometimes our complaints serve a purpose,
Right.
even if it's just to make us feel better in that moment.
Yeah.
But as Bowen later realized, relying on complaining as a crutch, it can also be detrimental.
Yeah.
He has this powerful line in the book. He says, "What comes out of your mouth determines your reality."
Ooh, I like that.
Makes you think, right?
It does. About the long-term consequences of those complaints.
Absolutely.
So even seemingly beneficial complaints, they might actually be holding us back,
Precisely.
and we don't even realize it.
Right. And to illustrate the power of, like, small, consistent actions,
Yeah.
Bowen shares another story about Mike Carmichael's world's largest ball of paint.
Oh, yeah. I remember reading about that.
Yeah.
It started as just a simple baseball with a coat of paint added each day, and now it weighs over 3,500 pounds.
Can you believe that? It's wild.
It's mind-boggling how something so small can become so massive over time.
Right. And that's the whole point. It's a brilliant analogy for habit formation. Just like adding a layer of paint each day transformed that baseball complaining as a habit built one complaint at a time.
Okay, I'm seeing the connection.
But here's the key. The same principle applies to building positive habits.
So if we can become aware of our complaining habit and start replacing those thoughts and words with positive ones,
Yeah.
we can gradually build a more positive, fulfilling reality.
Exactly.
Okay.
And it starts with recognizing the subtle ways complaining might be creeping into our lives. Think about it. What are some everyday situations where you find yourself complaining, even about little things?
That is a good question to think about. I'm definitely guilty of complaining about, like, traffic or the weather.
Yeah, it's easy to fall into those thought patterns, for sure.
It is. But what about when you're, like, surrounded by other complainers?
Oh, yeah.
How do you deal with that without getting sucked into their negativity?
That's a tough one. And Bowen addresses it in the book. He actually outlines, like, 5 main types of complainers.
Like types.
5 types. And he gives strategies for dealing with each one.
Okay, so let's break it down. Who's first on the list?
First up, we've got the attention seeker, the person who seems to thrive on, negativity and drama.
Oh, I know a few people like that.
Right. Bowen uses the example of a coworker who's always coming to your desk to complain about something. They may not even be looking for solutions. They just want someone to validate their complaints.
It can be so draining to be around that kind of energy.
It is. So instead of waiting for them to come to you with a complaint, try being proactive and giving them some positive attention. Ask about your day, their weekend plans, anything to shift the focus away from the negative.
Okay.
Sometimes all they really want is to feel heard.
Right. It's about redirecting that energy, not shutting them down completely.
Exactly.
Okay, who's next on the list?
Next up, we have the responsibility avoider. This is the person who loves to blame outside circumstances.
Oh, yeah.
Or other people for their problems. They always say things like, it's impossible, or it's not my fault.
Oh, yeah, the masters of deflecting blame. I've definitely met a few of those.
Haven't we all? And a good way to handle this type of complainer is to ask a simple question. If it were possible, how would you do it?
If it were possible.
Yeah. It encourages them to shift their thinking from limitations to possibilities.
Ooh, I like that. It forces them to get a little creative.
Exactly.
Okay, who else is on this list of complainers?
All right, next up we have the envy-inspiring complainer. This is the master of, passive-aggressive negativity.
Ugh, the worst.
I know, right? They use little digs, backhanded compliments, veiled criticisms, all to make themselves feel superior.
Oh, yeah. It's like they're trying to bring you down without directly saying it.
Exactly. And it's usually about something they secretly wish they had or could do. The key here is to redirect the focus.
Yeah.
By complimenting them on the opposite trait. So if they're complaining about someone being rude, point out how much you appreciate their kindness.
Okay.
You flip the script, and it might even make them think twice about their own behavior.
It's subtle, but effective.
Yeah.
Okay, we have 2 more types of complainers to go. Who's next?
The 4th type is the power-hungry complainer.
Oh.
This is the person who uses negativity to control and manipulate others.
Oh, the drama queens.
Yeah. Bowen actually gives the example of negative political campaigning. That's a classic example of this tactic.
Right. All about sowing discord,
Yeah.
using fear and anger to get what they want.
Right.
How do you deal with that?
The key here is to encourage, direct and honest communication. So if they're complaining about a colleague, for example, suggest they talk directly to that person instead of gossiping behind their back.
Right. Healthy conflict resolution.
Exactly.
Okay. Last but not least, who's the final complainer on Bowen's list?
Last but not least, we have the poor performance excuser. This is the person who always has a reason why something didn't get done.
Oh, yeah. Always an excuse.
The sun was in my eyes, I had a headache, the dog ate my homework, you name it.
The masters of procrastination.
Right. So instead of just accepting their excuses,
Yeah.
try asking empowering questions
Yeah.
that shift the focus from blame to solutions.
Give me an example.
Okay, you could ask, what can you do next time to be prepared if that happens again?
What can you do next time? I like that.
Yeah, it encourages them to take ownership, think proactively.
It's helping them move from like victim mentality to a creator mentality. That's good stuff. So we've covered the 5 types of complainers. What's the overall takeaway? Is it about like shutting down all complaints or learning to complain more effectively?
It's not about silencing others or pretending negative emotions don't exist.
Right.
It's about recognizing the difference between healthy venting and chronic complaining, shifting the energy towards something more positive and productive. And that leads us to another important theme in the book, the power of silence.
Silence.
And choosing our words carefully.
You know, it's funny because Bowen talks about finding solace in silence as a teenager, which was a huge contrast to his father, who always needed noise in the background.
Interesting.
Do you think there's a connection between like our comfort level with silence and our tendency to complain?
That's an interesting thought. Maybe those who are uncomfortable with silence, they feel this need to fill the void, even if it's with negative words.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Bowen also talks about how he intentionally reframed his perception of minivans.
Minivans.
Yeah, he used to get so annoyed by them.
I can relate.
But then he started thinking of them as pace cars.
Pace cars.
Yeah, like reliable, spacious, perfect for families.
Okay.
It's a simple shift, but it changed his whole experience.
These examples show how important mindfulness is. Becoming aware of our inner dialogue, the language we use.
Right.
It reminds us that we can choose our words, and in doing so, shape our reality.
He even suggests a word substitution exercise,
Ooh.
where you consciously choose words that evoke a more positive feeling.
Like what?
Like, instead of saying, I have to do something, try saying, I get to.
I get to.
Yeah, it's subtle, but it can make a big difference in how you approach a task.
It's like retraining your brain to look for the positive, even when things are tough.
Right.
And speaking of tough, Bowen has this crazy story about driving this old truck that breaks down in the middle of nowhere.
Oh, no.
Engine dies, oil light comes on, he's stranded on this deserted road late at night.
I would be freaking out.
Right. But instead of panicking or complaining, he keeps saying this phrase over and over. This is going to work out perfectly.
He just kept repeating that. This is going to work out perfectly.
Yeah, like an affirmation. He chose to believe things would work out even though the situation looked bad.
Wow. So he, like, willed his way out of a breakdown?
It's pretty wild. So the truck sputters to a stop right in front of a house.
No way. What are the chances?
Right. And guess what?
What?
The guy who lives there happens to be a Ford truck mechanic.
You can't make this stuff up.
It's a perfect example of how a positive mindset can shift circumstances.
Incredible.
But it gets even better. Later that night, when he's running low on oil again, he uses the same affirmation.
This is going to work out perfectly.
Yep. And guess what? He finds the perfect oil on sale at a gas station.
It sounds almost unbelievable.
I know, right? But I guess that's the whole point. Our beliefs and expectations, they influence outcomes.
If you're always expecting the worst, you're more likely to attract those negative experiences.
Exactly. And that brings us to a really powerful concept Bowen talks about. False hope.
False hope. That sounds kind of, I don't know, contradictory. Isn't hope, like, always a good thing?
That's what Bowen thought at first, too.
Okay.
But then he shares this really personal story about his mom. She had a heart attack.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And the doctors gave her this really grim prognosis.
Like how grim?
They said she only had a 15% chance of survival.
Oh, man.
Even his friend, who was a cardiologist, told him not to get his hopes up.
Wow. So even a medical professional was saying basically, prepare for the worst.
Yeah. That it would just be more painful when she, inevitably passed.
That must have been so hard to hear.
It was. But here's the thing. Bowen refused to accept that. He chose to believe she would recover. And, amazingly, she defied the odds.
She did?
Yeah. She lived for another decade.
That's incredible. It really shows you the power of belief.
It does. And this whole experience really changed his perspective on hope.
So how does this all connect to false hope?
Well, he realized that the idea of false hope is itself kind of flawed. True hope. It's an unwavering belief in a positive outcome, no matter what.
So it's not about, like, ignoring reality. or pretending challenges don't exist.
No, not at all. It's about choosing to focus on the possibility of things working out.
So trusting that even if things don't go exactly as planned, there's a higher purpose at play.
Exactly. And this brings us to an important question for you to think about.
Okay.
What false hope are you holding on to? That could actually be a powerful force in your life if you really embraced it.
That's a good question. I think we all have those dreams that we've pushed aside.
We're afraid to fully embrace them.
Right, because we're afraid of failing or disappointing others, or
Maybe we've just been told so many times that it's impossible.
that we start to believe it.
Right.
This deep dive has been really eye-opening. We've talked about how complaining shapes our reality, the power of choosing our words, embracing a positive mindset.
Yeah, it's been a fascinating look at Bowen's ideas, and at its core, a complaint-free world. It offers this simple, but powerful message. We have way more power to shape our reality than we think.
I like that.
It starts with being aware of our thoughts and words and making a choice
Yeah.
to shift our focus from negativity to possibility.
So stepping out of that complaint loop.
Yep, into a world of gratitude, optimism, and joy.
It's definitely a challenge. But, like Bowen's stories show us, the rewards can be pretty amazing.
They can.
So what will you choose to create?
Will you let yourself embrace those false hopes and see where they lead you?
That's the question we leave you with today. Until next time, keep diving deep, stay curious.
And remember, a complaint-free world starts with each of us.